Yeah, yeah. Oh my baby, you know money no day. Bibia be okay. I will not play. I go work hard. I know baba day. Take a look at me now. Everything's gonna change soon. Make you be with me now. Am I hold on and you're gone too soon? Bibia be find your baby.
Hello folks, my name is Oral Ofori and I'm here with Gina Humber as my special guest. Gina is a world traveler, she is also an author, and she has an amazing story to tell on today's edition of the show. Gina, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate you making time to be here with us.
I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So I was telling my audience that you're both an author and a world traveler, but in a nutshell, who is Gina Humber?
Wow, that's a really comprehensive question.
Nutshell.
Is that the key word? Okay.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, Gina Humber is a conscious mother and someone who decided to write a children's book because as an educator, I got to see that the books giving the narrative, the characters weren't reflective of either the people in my classroom, the students in my classroom, nor my home life.
Right.
So having the opportunity to write the book was a part of it. And being a world traveler is just a part of growing in terms of humanity and how I treat one another based on our differences as well as our similarities. In a nutshell.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice nutshell.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you're also an educator. Tell us a little bit about that. What students do you teach and what subjects do you teach?
I teach special education.
Okay.
So it was important for me to include child with disabilities in my children's book. I've been teaching special education for the past 21 years, and it's been rewarding and beautiful.
Nice.
And but the most important thing is that their stories get told. So it's been rewarding to be a teacher that goes out their way to be creative so that they can learn different stories, including their own.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the fact that it's important to have the other side of the story, which is not being told. Is it especially for the American audience or for the young American students that you teach?
In terms of the book?
In terms of the book.
The book is for any parent or teacher wanting to introduce their children to other ethnic groups, other religions, and being able to have a discussion based on it. The book is for parents and teachers to realize that there's more than one narrative.
Right.
And that in this society of different cultures and different people and different religions, the best way to go about that to small children is a book. They say that a good book teaches a child, but a great book teaches both the child and the parent. So I've set this book up to be a great book.
Interesting. We'll talk some more about the book eventually down the line in this conversation, but let me delve a little bit into your traveling experience. There's an old saying that goes that we travel not to escape the world, but we travel so the world does not escape us.
Oh.
What motivates your traveling?
What motivates my traveling is a lot of things. So I'll just narrow it down to three.
Right.
One, experiencing the Afrocentric culture around, because we as Africans, as Black people, are everywhere. And I wanted to, when I travel, find those places where we are. Just for a small example, some of my friends have been to Paris, right? And they'll be like, oh, Gina, there was no Black experience in Paris. And I'm sure we both know that Paris has a very huge African community there. Not to mention the Black Americans who went to Europe in search of kind of freedom and liberty.
Right.
And so there is that experience there that we forget, that we can touch into and equate. So traveling for me became a part of that because I started to see only one side again, that narrative, that construct.
Right.
And so I wanted to see all the different sides that we as people of color have touched. And the best way to go about doing that is seeing it through travel. And then it builds up this kind of humanity between myself as the traveler and the people who actually live there.
So far, of all the countries you've visited, which to you, in your personal opinion, is the most eccentric?
That's really hard, but I have a deep connection to Cuba.
Okay.
And so I actually love the Cuban people. I mean, I love everything about them. And you think about people who've had to struggle, you know, when you look at their cars, right? And so,
Vintage.
you know, yeah, I mean, but they're working in pristine condition.
Right.
You know, they're able to make $1 out of 15 cents for real. And so when I look at the government and how the government has been changing over time, it's very important to me the things that are happening right now in Cuba. So
one of the most significant changes in Cuba is under the Barack Obama presidency, and people have really appreciated that, and some people have not. I personally am all for it because it gives me the opportunity to visit some other different country and not worry about paying a ton in in travel expenditure, you know, to go to further places. But when you went to Cuba, what were some of the things that you experienced that made you feel like, oh my gosh, I've really been lost on this for a while?
Well, first, I want to say that I didn't go when you were supposed to go. It's during Barack Obama's tenure. I actually went before. I actually snuck into the country, which is super cool for me.
Illegally?
Illegally.
Oh my gosh, we have an illegal immigrant on set.
It's the American way. So, so let me say that first.
Right.
What I found about Cuba, besides the music and the people and the food, was this tenacity, right? And then that Afro connection that Cuba has. And then because I'm also, I believe and hope to be like a constant study as it pertains to people's history, to research their laws and look at how they have laws in place right now as it pertains to colorism. And it's fascinating, actually. The whole Castro regime has been very fascinating as it pertains, and now seeing how they are developing after Castro has passed has been interesting too. So I love Cuba's Afrocentric side to them. I love the Africanism of Cuba. I love everything about it, and I hope to see them continue to grow.
That's interesting. Loving the Afrocentricity of Cuba, a country that exists in a continent that is way out of Africa.
Right.
Now let's zoom into Africa.
Yeah.
I hear you are really passionate about Africa and you really want to visit Ghana.
Right.
I'm not saying this because I'm from Ghana.
Right. There's no bias from you whatsoever.
No bias.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to delve deeper into your, love of and for Afrocentrism. What is driving you to visit not just Ghana particularly, but Africa in general?
Well, my company, Diversity is the Verb, has been doing business with Ghana for a long time in terms of different orphanages and different projects within. And I'm a firm believer that we as African or Black Americans living here, we need to make that connection with Africa. Even though I and my DNA came out to be more Cameroon.
Right.
And would love to go to Cameroon first.
I still love you. It's okay.
But Ghana is very welcoming. You know what I'm saying? And so even now with the president of Ghana making that invitation of the year of return, he did it before any other country in Africa. I'm sure they're all, will start to get on. But the foresight of the president right now in Ghana is extremely rewarding. It's like, yeah, that's exactly the way to go in order to create this connection between Black Americans and Africans, and to do it both on an economic level, a social level, political level, that kind of thing. So Ghana to me is kind of forward thinking as it pertains to that. More to me than any other country, but I'm sure, people would argue back and forth, but I haven't seen, I know Benin is doing some things. So I'm in constant talks and works with Africa, but Ghana seems to be more open in terms of what it wants to do.
It feels good to hear a non-Ghanaian speak so highly and so well of Ghana, and I'm truly humbled. Like they say, a prophet is not respected in his own country, and you don't know what you've got until you lose it. And as I left, Africa, Ghana particularly, to come to the US, I see some of the cultural differences. I start to begin to appreciate the more, life in Ghana. But then I realize also that you can't look into a bottle with both eyes. So wherever you're at should be where your focus resides. That way you can fully give yourself in order to hit whatever target you're trying to hit or achieve whatever purpose you're looking to achieve. And I like the name of your company, Diversity is the Verb. You were very particular about it. That way people don't think, oh, she meant diversity as a noun or as an adjective.
Right.
It's doing.
Right.
Speaking of doing, what is diversity as a verb about?
Well, you already know that I'm an educator, so we know that diversity is not a noun. And I hate when people go, it's not a verb. I know. I have several degrees. I'm aware of it. But of course, the play in the words is that we would understand that diversity is an action. And we would stop using it so carelessly in terms of jobs and housing, as if you put 2 or 3 people of color, that somehow you have now diversified your group or your institution. And that's not the case. Diversity isn't just about ethnicity. It's also about sexuality. It's also about physical handicaps or mental handicaps. It's an inclusive environment. So the company Diversity is a Verb, we specifically do things in a very inclusive way. Everything from give scholarships out to kids in the Bronx to working with Ghana, and hopefully doing more things as it pertains to a Pan-African approach. Yeah.
America is in the news literally every day, and majority of the items that are in the news about America emanates from actions or inactions of the president. People, for some reason, have started to gaze their eyes on America, all because of what is happening as a result of the leadership the country has today. When people see this happenings, some of them feel like, oh, it's just a season, it'll pass. Some others too are like, it's meant to be the way it is today. When your kids ask you about it, what do you say to them?
The wonderful thing about your question isn't just that when my own children ask, but when my students ask or when I have conversations with others. And what I'd like for them to know is we're in a really great time. And the time is a really more awakening. Every other group, whether it's Asians, Muslims, whatever group, they are collective in terms of their economics. There's not a breakdown in terms of who they support. I could go on and on with different groups. And so when we as people of color get to, instead of go to the first thing you buy a product, from a well-named company, knowing that you have your own people out there who have soaps and oils and toothpaste and clothing. For example, this jacket that I have on is, of course, made by an African-American designer. So I purpose my life. So that's the hope that I have, that we would begin to purposely purchase our own from our own, keeping it within the community. Our dollars don't stay in the community. We have $1 trillion buying power. We have enough buying power, as a country of our own, but we do not use it as other people do. So my hope is that the Kwanzaa principles will be something that will be constant and ongoing, that we would understand our buying power, we would understand our power within one another, and that this president doesn't deter us from that. If anything, he should encourage us each and every day to support our own within our community, to keep our dollars in. So that's my hope.
Yeah, that's a good thing to hope.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your book now. It's All Good, a book about self-acceptance and diversity, if my audience are able to see it. But what inspired this book?
Two things inspired this book. One, my daughter, who is darker complected than I am.
Right.
And so at the time that I wrote this book, I had very long hair.
Right.
And as you know, Oral, my hair is like shaved off on the sides.
Okay.
So my daughter had a hard time when she was 6 years old. Now she's 18. But at the time she was 6 years old, she had a hard time with me. She didn't know if I was black. She didn't know what I was. And the long hair and everything like that didn't, per se, help her, right? And so she questioned her own beauty. And as an educator and as a parent, I didn't see books about melanin. And I didn't see books that dealt with colorism. And so the best way that I can do it as an educator and as a mother was to create one.
Right.
So through that, the four main characters, one African American, one Latino, one Asian American, one with disabilities, but throughout the book, you'll see kids with hijabs on and turbans and yarmulkes and all different kinds, because that's what real diversity entails, right? A real inclusion entails. And then as an educator, I saw that special needs children, I always tell parents, find me 2 books where you see a special needs child as a main character, and they cannot. And I don't understand why. Do we constantly want to put them behind the box, right? Or behind the wall? There are stories to be told. When I was growing up, books like Dick and Jane and The Cat in the Hat sufficed at that time.
Right.
But now we need books that suffice for the time that we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is books that deal with how beautiful melanin is. That is books that deal with the body images that students struggle with and that kids struggle with. That is knowing that as a child who has a disability, you are beautiful, accepted, that whole thing. And as an Asian American, the same thing.
Right.
The content doesn't really change, you know, so that's why the stories have to be told. Otherwise, if you don't tell the stories, then their voices don't matter. And it's time that our voices started to matter in the children's stories that we read unto them. That's
profound. 2019, it's a new year. I really don't believe in that new year, new me thing. I mean, every day is an opportunity to be a better person for me personally.
That's good.
But of course, I'm happy to be alive in the new year, so that's great. What are your projections for the new year? As a person, what do you hope to achieve? What do you hope to inspire other people to achieve through your work?
Well, I hope that, you know, that ever since President Obama left, that diversity has been a very small issue on people's plate. I hope that 2019, that people will begin to have these conversations again about the importance of inclusion. I hope that, again, we'll get to a point of humanity and that we'll begin to stand up for our brothers and sisters regarding what hue or what size or what gender. I hope that we get to a point that we understand that there's really only one race, and that's the human race. Everything else is just ethnicities and cultures in between. That's what I'd like to walk away with 2019.
Right.
And of course, the opportunity to go to Ghana.
Travel some more, eh? Interesting.
Yeah.
Viewers, we're speaking to Gina Humber. She's a world traveler and an author. This is her most recent and newest book. And we're going to take a short break. And when we get back, we have someone here from South Africa who is going to join us and ask you a few questions. And you can also feel free to talk to them ask them about South Africa.
Perfect.
So yeah, we'll be back soon. Thank you.
I recently wrote a children's book called It's All Good, a book about self-acceptance and diversity. I'm also a speaker, and I speak on lots of different issues such as diversity, inclusion, and what that means and what that looks like and how we use that to empower our society. And Diversity is a Verb is about educating people on their power of who they are. And it means 2 things. It means, 1, that we want to see diversity be empowered through action. And 2, that if you're doing that, then diversity is a verb. It's kind of a twofold kind of play on words. People will say, oh, children don't know anything about color, or they don't know anything about race, or they don't know anything about religions, but they do. They do based on you as a parent and what you feed them regarding other people. In discussing these issues back and forth, the youth begin to create a new construct, a new paradigm of how to look at one another, how to look at one another's differences, and how that affects our community.
Welcome back to the show, folks. We're joined here originally by Gina Humber, an author and world traveler, and our new guest, Riaan Oppelt. Riaan is originally from South Africa. He also is a teacher and he lectures in South Africa. And the reason he's here is so he can interact with Gina Humber and they can get to know each other and find out more about South Africa and America in a way that ropes in the Afrocentric crowd and subject. So, Gina, any question for Riaan?
You know what I'd like to know, because I know South Africa, of course, has been through a lot of different changes.
Yeah.
So what should I expect when entering South Africa?
That's a great question. And firstly, it's so great to meet you.
You as well.
I've really been enjoying your interview. I'm so happy and thrilled that I can be a part of it.
Thank you.
And to answer your question, you can expect, just from my point of view, a lot of unfinished conversations and many more starting with an immediate destiny of also not being finished. There's a lot that is unresolved in South Africa. I think this might go for many countries in the world. You certainly are very well traveled. You've seen some of this. Your own thoughts on the United States tell me quite a bit about your views. And in South Africa, it's necessary that there will be questions. In 2019, South Africa faces the national elections, and more questions you can imagine will come there in terms of leadership, in terms of our future and our trajectory. We have joined the very kind of continental discussions of decolonizing education and curriculums. So should you visit South Africa anytime, perhaps in the next year, you will find with a great fast pace, many, many strong, urgent conversations. And it's probably best that there aren't really responses to that yet, because I think everyone needs to partake in dialogue. You'll certainly be entering in these conversations, and you'll be asked many questions to yourself coming from the United States.
Tell us some of the exciting places she could visit if she had the time to explore South Africa, dwelling on the touristic aspect of the country.
Well, they are usually very typical answers one gives. My home base is Cape Town. That would usually be the first that is recommended to you. But I'll probably go a little bit off script on that and tell you that South Africa is so very much a driving country. I suppose many countries could say that, but there's a lot of natural scenery to behold. And various parts of the country have different looks, different feels, different stories, and most importantly, different peopled stories. There are 11 official languages in South Africa. You will feel the different languages and the different cultures of different parts. More to the eastern Cape side, on the lower seaboard of the country, you will feel what Xhosa culture is. Moving upwards from there.
I did. I was like, all right.
And if you just move more upwards, you'll experience Zulu culture, and in other parts of the country, Sotho culture and Setswana culture. It is a magical array of so many different people and what we like to call peopled narratives. And by we, I just mean anyone who likes to read these things, who's a follower of culture. And I would almost encourage you to take the road trips before you settle yourself in the scenic Cape Towns and the very busy metropolis of Johannesburg. And Johannesburg is a fascinating place because everyone comes together there for whatever the needs are. It's probably going to be very raw when I say this, but it's not the most attractive South African city, but it is certainly the most representative of where South Africa is possibly on its way to going. So in terms of cities, I will tell you that, but please take a ride around the towns, see the communities, go deeper inland, go to the places where the cameras aren't going, and you'll know something about South Africa.
Now, will you be able to help me if I give you a call?
I love to drive. If I say it's a driving country, it means I like to drive a lot of it myself. So if you don't mind being driven around.
Cool, cool. I'm going to take you up on that.
If I may ask you a question, if only because it's so profound to hear some of your views. Ironically, you have these very strong informed views, and they went into the creation of your book that you're sharing with us.
Mm-hmm.
And this book is aimed at the younger readership, which only bodes well.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that had been lacking perhaps in prior generations, and this comes across very strongly now. There are so many things that we ourselves, in our age group, I imagine, archive from our experiences and what we hear from others. And I'm going to reference a book that is definitely not aimed at a younger market, but that we might draw something from, and that is the book called Critique of Black Reason, written by Professor Achille Mbembe, who is based partly in the United States as well as in South Africa, and Cameroonian-born. A great, respected, noted and beloved figure, an academic figure, a writer, philosopher in Africa, who in this book, launched in 2017, although originally it was written in his mother tongue of French in 2013, he makes a statement that says between Africa, the continent of Africa, and the United States of America, there is an archive. Firstly, it is an archive of silence, because the modern world, in all its facets, what we know as modernity, turned on slavery. And slavery is the silent archive, where humans and their rights were silenced. And Professor Mbembe feels that it is within North America, within the United States, that the idea of the archive between Africa and the United States is something that is known. And even what I hear from what you're saying, we are continuing to find out more about it, and we discuss it more, especially in the United States. But he feels it is still something of a silent archive in Africa, that there's less knowledge of it in Africa itself. And you might argue this is the point of origin. If I just have to ask you to personally just riff on that, how would you go about that?
You know, before we got on air, I told you that I had a few of my African friends who have said that they did not study about African studies per se until their college, which for me baffled me, because I would assume, it's throughout, but of course colonization, right? So because it baffled me so much in terms of the two differences, right? So where we have people from Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey, and then and it also has a lot to do with, I was brought up in the 60s. So during my era, Black Power was very important. So it's not something I gave up or, give into. But when I look at Africans, you guys are primarily very new in terms of being on your own right now, like a new country, so to speak.
Right.
And so I look at all the things that you were discussing in terms of change, and I assume, of course, what the professor said was right on target in terms of even the education. Like I was looking at a school in Africa, and they were like, well, most of our books start with European history and that whole study, and it was like, wow. So I really need to set up avenues where there is this exchange between us back and forth in terms of us growing both socially, in terms of what we know about one another. And I think that's the bridge that will help us, cross. And I actually can't wait for us to start to decolonize in terms of how we look at our education, our spaces, our conversations. And so Africa is having a very poignant time right now in terms of discovering who they are, and in terms of discovering their power and how they want to move with that.
Thank you very much for that. She actually echoes your point, doesn't she? You felt Africa is in a certain moment right now, Oral. And she mentioned Marcus Garvey, who actually has a contribution in your country's flag.
Right. Marcus Garvey is like a great, individual. A lot of these independent stories that propelled a lot of these African countries to fight for their independence from so-called colonial masters or from slavery, were, a spin-off off of writings of Marcus Garvey, speeches of Marcus Garvey, and actions of Marcus Garvey. So he plays a very pivotal role that some people, if not many, are not aware of. And I think Gina wants to say something.
I do, because I really want to discuss in this short amount of time how media plays a part in how we self-actualize ourselves, right? And so now you're seeing in Black America our stories being told by Black directors. And so when I look at Africa, I think of your media is starting to grow in terms of the stories that we want to put out there. But we still have a problem as it pertains to our stories. Like when you said that, it made me think of the Nat Turner movie.
Right.
And how, yay, we could be happy about the Nat Turner movie that came out, but there's still this kind of underlining story that they still put in,
right.
And we don't get our stories told. And when I think about what you have brought up, I think about that we in our media, we have to be able to control our media, both in our art, both in our words, both in everything, because that will give us the power that we need, so that even if a young child doesn't know, who we were talking about, Marcus Garvey, any of those people, you're able now to have television shows and movies that portray us in a very powerful way. And so that's what we've been fighting, I think, here in the United States, this depiction of how they've told the story as us as African Americans, and how we believe that story about ourselves, and creating new stories for us, by us.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
Based off of that, Riaan, in just about some 20, 30 seconds, tell us, what are some of the ways we can use the media to project the African story in a way that presents its authenticity?
It is to really turn it over to where the voices are without necessarily a framing device or a curating. We have cameras on our phones, those of us with access to those African people with access to those phones. Turn the camera on and see what happens before we curate it, before we get into fake news and post-truth.
That's interesting. Basically, we all have the power to tell the story, but we need to tell it in the right way. It's been a pleasure having you here, Gina Humber. Thanks for sharing with us about your book.
Appreciate it.
And your traveling stories. Riaan Oppelt,
Oral.
It's been a pleasure being with you again. And
This is fun.
my name is Oral Ofori. This has been
Yeah. Oh my baby, money no day, Bibia be okay. I will not play, I go work hard, I know baba day. Take a look at me now. Everything's gonna change soon. Make you be with me now. Am I done and you're gone too soon? Bibia be find your baby.